Welcome to the pre-recorded webinar providing emergency preparedness supports for students experiencing homelessness. This webinar is hosted jointly by the National Center for Homeless Education and the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMTA Center. Watch this video to learn more about incorporating the needs of students experiencing homelessness in your school safety efforts, which includes security, emergency management, and preparedness activities. If you are viewing this recording on the National Center for Homeless Education's website, you will be provided with an opportunity to confirm your learning through a brief knowledge check at the end of the presentation. My name is Janelle Hughes, and I serve as the Project Director here at the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center.
And my name is Kenya Haynes, and I am a Program Specialist in the Policy and Partnership Division of the National Center for Homeless Education.
So happy to partner with you today on this event, Kenya. And we have a full agenda for this hour. We know that some of you have accessed this webinar because you work directly in the field of homeless education, while others are here based on their other roles in the education field at the local or state level, or based on your role in supporting emergency preparedness efforts within your education agency. By the end of this session, participants will be able to explain criteria for a student to be considered a homeless child or youth under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, identify the basic rights of students experiencing homelessness and responsibilities for ensuring those rights, and explain the basic components of an emergency operations plan, or EOP, and strategies to effectively incorporate youth, children, and families experiencing homelessness.
Before we begin, I want to share a little about the National Center for Homeless Education, or NCHE. We operate the Technical Assistance Center for the U.S. Department of Education's Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. NCHE is based at the SERV Center at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Please check out our website, where you'll find resources on a myriad of topics related to children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness, including briefs, webinars, both live and recorded, and awareness products that you can order free in limited quantities. You can also contact our helpline via phone or email to get a quick response to your questions about serving students and families. Feel free to join our listserv, where we share information relevant to these students and families, and check us out on social media.
If this is your first time meeting the REMTA Center, welcome. The U.S. Department of Education and its Office of Safe and Supportive Schools administers the REMTA Center to help build the preparedness capacity, including prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts of schools, school districts, and institutions of higher education with their community partners at the local, state, and federal levels. REMTA Center staff members are available via email or phone to respond to your request for technical assistance on EOP development. I'll turn things over to Kenya now to provide a brief overview of education for homeless children and youth.
Thank you. Before we get into detail about emergency operation plans, we will take a moment to explore which children are eligible for services under the McKinney-Vento Act, also referred to as the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program. Here, let's look at the statutory definition of homelessness. This is the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which is used by U.S. public schools, Head Start programs, and higher education. The law uses what we call an umbrella definition of lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Neither the law nor the guidance provide official definitions of those terms, so we use the dictionary definitions. A fixed residence is one that is stationary and permanent, so it's not moving around on wheels. A regular residence is one that is used on a predictable, routine, and consistent basis, and an adequate residence is one that is lawfully and reasonably sufficient for meeting the physical and psychological needs typically met in home environments. People tend to be more attuned to homelessness when there's a major crisis, like a hurricane or major economic downturn. Even then, they're often stunned to discover how significant this problem is among children and youth. More than 1.2 million students enrolled in public school experienced homelessness in school year 2021-2022. Those students typically account for approximately 2.5% of all students. For information on the number of students experiencing homelessness in your state, visit the Data tab on the NCHE website. 9% of students experiencing homelessness are identified as unaccompanied homeless youth. Under the McKinney-Vento Act, an unaccompanied youth includes a homeless child or youth not in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. It is important to note that the definition refers to physical custody as opposed to legal custody. Oftentimes, when youth have either been forced from the home or run away, their parents or guardians maintain legal custody, but not physical custody. McKinney-Vento eligibility is based on the student's current housing status, so a student can be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth even if the parent or guardian says they're willing to provide a home. The law doesn't say why the student lost housing. It only asks if the student lacks fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. When planning for emergency operations, this student population may have unique needs. You can learn more about unaccompanied homeless youth by visiting the Topics page at the NCHE website. The McKinney-Vento Act requires that every LEA or school district must appoint a liaison, whether or not the LEA receives a McKinney-Vento subgrant. The liaison determines whether students meet the McKinney-Vento eligibility criteria, assists families and unaccompanied homeless youth with enrollment and understanding their educational rights, and can make referrals to community services. They can play an important role in assisting families during an emergency. More information about the responsibility of liaison is in Chapter 2 of NCHE's Homeless Liaison Toolkit. Now that we have a shared understanding of who McKinney-Vento students are, we'd like to touch briefly on some rights afforded to these children and youth. Homelessness creates many kinds of barriers for students, and the law seeks to reduce those barriers to ensure school success. Some rights provided to students include immediate enrollment in school, even when students do not have all necessary documentation on hand, transportation to the student school of origin, which is the school a student last attended before losing their housing, free school meals, receipt of partial credit for work successfully completed in another school or district, and dispute resolution regarding student eligibility, enrollment, or school selection. For detailed information on EHCY student rights, view the NCHE pre-recorded webinar, Basic Requirements of the McKinney-Vento Act. I will turn it over now to Janelle and the team from REMS.
Thank you so much, Kenya. We are happy to move forward into the portion of our webinar where we'll provide an overview of the importance of and components of emergency operations plan. The school EOP describes how people, not just students, but also teachers, administrators, staff, and visitors, as well as property, will be protected on and off campus. It also details who is responsible for carrying out specific actions before, during, and after an emergency, identifies the personnel, equipment, facilities, supplies, and other resources available, and outlines how all actions will be coordinated. While school EOPs vary in their contents as they are customized according to the school building, they generally contain three main sections. The Basic Plan section provides an overview of the school's approach to emergency operations, such as training, exercises, and information collection. The Functional Annexes section presents how the school will manage common essential functions like evacuation, communications, accounting for all people, etc., before, during, and after an emergency. And the Threat and Hazard Specific Annexes section identifies protocols schools will follow to address the specific emergencies, such as hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, food contamination, power outages, etc. School EOPs should be developed by school-level emergency planning and response teams with membership from the district's core planning team. The formation of this multidisciplinary planning team is step one of the six-step planning process that is outlined within the Guide for Developing High-Quality School EOPs, known as the School Guide, and the role of districts in developing high-quality school EOPs, known as the District Guide. These guides may be used by core planning teams to create new plans, as well as to revise and update existing plans. You can access the at-a-glance versions from their MTA Center website. Why collaborate? Because the planning and development of a school EOP requires the expertise of a diverse group of people so that it reflects the diverse needs of the school community. Everyone has expertise to contribute: school administrators, transportation directors, teachers, school facility managers, information technology specialists, and of course, local homeless education liaisons, which is why we are here today. As the school and district planning teams develop protocols to support homeless and displaced students and families, they can use the six-step planning process, which is described in the guide. The guides were developed by the Department of Education and the U.S. Departments of Justice, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Homeland Security, led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This planning process can be used to review, revise, or create an EOP, and it ensures that school plans are integrated into those at the local, state, and national levels. As you can see on your screen, the 6 steps involve forming a collaborative planning team, understanding the situation, determining goals and objectives, plan development or identifying courses of action, plan preparation, review, and approval, and lastly, plan implementation and maintenance. During step 1, schools and school districts should form the collaborative planning teams that will ensure McKinney-Vento services are provided and that displaced students and families get the services they need. This may include, but is not limited to, groups that the planning team will likely want to consult with, including those community planning partners that we discussed. During step 2, education agencies conduct assessments to identify threats and hazards and the resources available to address them. Capacity assessments may be conducted to evaluate the level of support needed to ensure that the needs of displaced students and families are met and that the proper staff are in place at the school district, as well as the state level. In step 3, determine goals and objectives. The planning team develops goals and objectives to address those prioritized hazards and threats identified during step 2. Goals and objectives specific to supporting homeless and displaced students and families may include assigning a person within each local education agency, emergency management agency, and or school safety center to serve as a liaison between the school district, partner agency, and the McKinney-Vento state coordinator to help ensure that state and local agencies are in compliance with federal, state, and local law. Step 4 goes into more detail and directs planning teams to create annexes that describe all of the activities to be completed. While we will talk about this in a little bit more detail on the next slide, education agencies should ensure that annexes created as a part of the EOP development process account for the needs of the whole school community, including those experiencing homelessness and displaced students and families, and also consider how emergency management functions activated during an emergency may need to be adjusted to accommodate those needs. And while Step 5 works to finalize the plan with approval from all parties, including the community partners we discussed earlier and the McKinney-Vento coordinator, it is in Step 6 that the planning process becomes the most dynamic. In Step 6, efforts focus on implementing and maintaining the plan, training stakeholders, and conducting exercises. We'll talk a little bit more about using drills and exercises to practice the plan, but the Department of Education encourages schools and school districts to consider how federal funds, REMS TA Center, and NCHE resources can support your education agencies with ensuring that key stakeholders are properly trained in key topics in emergency management, such as providing for the access and functional needs of the entire community.
An emergency can be challenging for all families and students. Students experiencing homelessness may have additional needs to consider when building an EOP, such as McKinney-Vento students and parents may not have access to cell phones, computers, or other devices that schools may use to communicate with families in an emergency. Because of the instability of their housing situations, students experiencing homelessness may not have a place to evacuate to. Many shelters are closed during the day. Unaccompanied youth may not have an adult in their life to assist them in the event of an emergency and may need additional support.
When an emergency occurs, as Kenya mentioned, and typical school activities and student services are momentarily suspended, there are many implications for education agencies and their community partners. For example, they may no longer be able to provide basic needs to community members who are experiencing homelessness, such as free meals, or they may receive an influx of students from a neighboring school district or distant school districts and systems. Education agencies may also see an increase in the need for support from students and families who are already experiencing homelessness, or an increase in new families experiencing homelessness who will require support with basic needs, including continuity of education. The COVID-19 pandemic is one example of how emergencies can increase the need to conduct emergency preparedness planning around supports for those students and families experiencing homelessness, in addition to displaced students and families. As the school planning team develops goals, objectives, and courses of action for their own EOP in collaboration with school district and community partners, they may want to consider addressing activities for before, during, and after an event. What actions can schools and school districts take before an emergency to ensure that support systems are set up? This might include creating memoranda of understanding and agreement with community organizations and or neighboring school districts, as well as clarifying in advance with human resource staff what information can and will be shared to ensure the enrollment process is as streamlined as possible for students and families. During emergencies, planning teams should ensure that all services are coordinated through and shared with McKinney-Vento state coordinators for reporting and compliance purposes. After an emergency takes place or during the recovery phase, education agencies can use EOPs to view outlined steps that key stakeholders should enact to ensure that students and families have been properly integrated into the learning environment. This may include home visits, special events held at the school for newly enrolled students and families who have been displaced from neighboring or out-of-state school districts, or other activities designed to promote engagement among new families in the community and to help promote overall resistance. EOP should also outline efforts to address all 5 mission areas of prevention, protection, mitigation and response, and recovery. Together, these areas all help with preparedness. What steps can education agencies take to prevent enrollment issues, protect students and families from the shame sometimes associated with displacement, mitigate barriers related to information sharing, ensure an expeditious response when providing services required under McKinney-Vento, and support displaced students and families throughout the recovery process, both short-term and long-term. When integrating supports for displaced students and families into EOPs, education agencies should also consider all settings and all times. For example, are there special considerations that schools might keep in mind specific to before or after school programs that may need to step in to service displaced families and students, or that may be disrupted or canceled as a result of an emergency? Do alternative systems of support need to be set up in the meantime, including transportation to and from after-school programs, and or ensuring that free meals can still be provided to these now classified as qualifying for free or reduced price lunch as a result of their displacement? These are just examples of planning aspects to consider. We encourage schools and school districts to brainstorm additional considerations with their EOP planning team, including their community partners such as state emergency management agencies, school safety centers, and others in an effort to ensure that plans to support homeless and displaced students and families address the before, during, and after aspects, all 5 preparedness mission areas, and all settings and all times. We encourage planning teams to integrate supports into the variety of functional and threat and hazard specific annexes developed as a part of school and school district EOPs. In particular, these support systems and efforts should be incorporated into the EOP's Recovery Annex, as much of the work of supporting displaced students and families will happen during the recovery phase following a community or district-wide emergency. They should also be incorporated into annexes specific to continuity of operations, as education agencies will need to ensure that students are reintegrated into their new learning environments as quickly as possible. A communication annex may outline how services and information provided should be shared and clarified with state coordinators, school staff, and other key stakeholders within the school community. And a family reunification annex may include specific instructions on how to handle students who have become displaced after the school or school district failed to reunify them with their families following a community or national disaster. Again, we encourage planning teams within education agencies to review each annex within their EOPs in collaboration with their community partners to determine whether there is a need to add a section, courses of action, and or roles and responsibilities specific to providing those supports to students and families experiencing homelessness and displacement. As schools develop EOP annexes that consider the needs of those families and students, it is important to ask key questions related to the emergency management functions that will be activated. This includes communications and warning. Will families have access to cell phones, computers, or other devices that schools may use to communicate with families in an emergency? We recommend coordinating with area liaisons to get resources to McKinney-Vento students who are living in their attendance areas, which might include resource lists. Schools and school districts can also purchase prepaid cell phones to offer to those students and families, and work to coordinate outreach to families, students at campgrounds, motels, laundromats, or convenience stores. There are so many strategies that can be used when thinking about communications and warning. In thinking about evacuation, where will students evacuate to if shelters are closed during the day, as Kenya alluded to earlier? What transportation supports will be provided to families who may not have transportation? Arrangements may need to be made for students who do not have a home setting to go to in the event schools are closed early, or who may not have access to transportation from parents or caregivers. In some cases, Shelters are closed during daytime hours as well. It's important to consider those nuances as courses of action are outlined within the event evacuation annex and other cross-cutting annexes, such as the Family Reunification Annex, which is, another annex to consider as the EOP is developed. To whom will students experiencing homelessness be released? In some cases, families and caregivers who are experiencing homelessness may not be able to get to reunification sites easily or at all. What accommodations will be provided to those students and families? And in thinking about recovery, who can schools partner with to ensure students get support and assistance after an emergency? Recovery services are often a critical aspect of the after aspects of an event planning, which may include home visits or sending materials to parents and caregivers to provide continued support to students. What additional support will be required for students and families who are experiencing homelessness? Do existing memoranda of agreement or understanding exist? Who can schools partner with, again, to get that support and assistance that they know students and families will need? These are all questions that education agencies should pose as they work to create or to enhance related annexes as a part of EOP development. And we know that the period after an emergency can be scary for youth and filled with anxiety, particularly when children have been forcibly removed from their home due to safety, destruction, or other factors. Along with ensuring that resilient strategies are in place for the whole school community, education agencies have to consider many factors when working to provide safe and supportive learning environments for displaced students and families. A few recommended approaches include avoid using the term homeless. Please note that the term homeless may serve as a deterrent to families who are enrolling their children in new schools or seeking support. Another option is to use the phrasing in McKenna-Venti Act's definition of homeless. For example, you might ask on an enrollment form, are you sharing someone else's housing because you have nowhere else to stay? Or are you sharing someone else's housing due to loss of housing or a similar reason? We also recommend that you work to develop and strengthen family engagement initiatives. Engaging with families during this time is so important. Work with your family engagement office, public information officer, and other partners to ensure that interactions are trauma-informed and culturally sensitive. Also, work to enhance language services. An influx of students and families from neighboring and distant communities can introduce the need to increase the number and type of bilingual and multilingual staff on site, and who can provide support with written communications distributed to new and existing members of the school community. It's important to develop those relationships with key partners in advance. Now is a good time to reach out to those partners in your localities, territories, and states to ensure that you understand who you can call on for support if your education agencies do receive an influx or increase in displaced students and families. From help with transporting displaced students to new districts and providing meals to those in need, to hiring counseling staff to support students and staff, take time now to consider key functions you will need to activate and which human resources can help ensure those functions can actually be activated with ease. Lastly, we recommend that you work to understand local, state, and federal laws. There are local, state, and federal laws that outline requirements specific to supporting students and families experiencing displacement and homelessness during and after disasters. So work with your emergency management team to ensure that you understand the requirements of these laws and that you are in compliance at all times. As we've discussed earlier, one such federal law is the McKinney-Vento Homelessness Assistance Act.
In our next section, we will discuss partners you may wish to bring to the table for your emergency planning.
Thanks, Kenya. Schools and school districts cannot support students and families experiencing homelessness and displacement on their own. Planning teams will need to collaborate with members of the whole school community, as we've been reiterating throughout this webinar, to ensure that EOPs outline how support systems created for homeless and displaced students and families will be coordinated and integrated throughout the community. Groups that the planning team will likely want to consult with include families and students to assure that any special needs or accommodations are met, such as bilingual services, free and reduced price lunch, the creation of individualized education plans, and systems that support other access and functional needs. School administrators and staff, including transportation staff and student health personnel, who will need to ensure that required services under McKinney-Vento and other support services needed during recovery, such as behavioral health support, for example, are provided. Should also consult with first responders, including law enforcement, the fire department, emergency medical services, and others who may be required to provide support during recovery, and who will therefore need to understand any special considerations specific to serving displaced students and staff, such as cultural sensitivities and language barriers that might require an adjustment in response approaches. Child-focused community groups such as the Boys and Girls Club or the Y, with whom displaced students and families may find support or shelter during short-term and long-term recovery, will also be key partners, along with before and after school programs that may need to adjust the level of services they provide to accommodate an influx or a decrease in students needing support. State and local healthcare practitioners, such as the public health department, hospitals, and pediatricians, with whom information may be shared or requested to aid in the provision of, for example, psychological first aid and or for general enrollment reasons, such as to ensure vaccinations, should also be consulted. Child welfare agencies, such as the Departments of Social Services, Human Services, Child and Family Services, and Public Health, who may need to step in as caregivers or provide other tiers of supports to students who have entered the social service system due to displacement or the loss of parents and or loved ones. Also, local emergency management representatives who need to understand requirements under McKinney-Vento and how EOPs and Memoranda of Understanding and Agreement should be created or revised to accommodate the needs of displaced families and students, as they will also serve as important sources of support during the EOP development phase. And lastly but not least, education agencies may also want to consult representatives from faith-based organizations who also serve as great sources of resilient support. Ensuring that plans are in place to support students and families displaced as a result of an emergency, as you have learned so far, definitely requires collaboration at the community level, but also between both school district and school staff. Schools must work with school districts, both their own and neighboring ones, to ensure that displaced students are properly enrolled, along with serving as a conduit of information for local and neighboring schools. School districts must ensure that transportation services are provided to displaced students, free and reduced price lunch services are still accessible, behavioral health supports are available, and that information about McKinney-Vento services and support provided by education agencies are properly transmitted to state coordinators. All of these activities will require a lot of information sharing between students, families, schools, and school districts within and across communities and states. As we discussed earlier, along with the McKinney-Vento Act, education agencies can turn to FERPA and HIPAA to gain guidance on federal requirements related to supporting students and families experiencing homelessness and exceptions specific to information sharing. It is important to keep in mind that any support systems developed should involve insight from school and school district level leaders and staff, as both the school district and school have a role in supporting these students and families in the event of an emergency based on federal legislation. Two recurring themes you'll hear from the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools and the REMS Center team are the need for education agencies to train and participate in exercises once they have developed emergency procedures in collaboration with their community partners. This applies to supports for students and families experiencing homelessness and displacement as well. External partners, such as local emergency management agencies, may not be familiar with McKinney-Vento and other federal legislation and support systems that we've highlighted today, or even the locality's protocols. So you may need to share them, which would include providing the link to the archived version of this webinar. Additionally, internal stakeholders such as your planning team, administrators, and McKinney-Vento state coordinator need to be aware of the processes you outline in school EOPs specific to the supports that you put in place. Not all partners need to know all the processes in detail, but they should be familiar with some of the basic concepts and where they can go for more information. Representatives from within school districts and schools should integrate supports for students and families into exercises when possible, so that key stakeholders can practice the required steps they will need to follow to ensure compliance with federal, state, and local laws, and to ensure that students and families get the support they need and also feel included. Whenever possible, we recommend that you include state coordinators and other community partners in exercises to promote collaboration and to further strengthen future response efforts. Inclusion supports resilience, and resilience supports recovery.
As emergencies occur, communities often need to be creative in responding to local needs. In this section, we will discuss some lessons learned and strategies developed to assist students and families.
Thank you, Kenya. And I think Hurricane Harvey provides one example of how a state or community-wide disaster can displace families and students, causing significant impacts for states, emergency management agencies, and school districts. After the disaster, NOAA estimated that 30,000 people were displaced. In November 2017, more than 70,000 people, including thousands of children, were still living in hotels through FEMA's Transitional Shelter Assistance Program. In the Conroe Independent School District in Houston, students classified as homeless nearly doubled in 2017, going from 475 in the 2016-2017 school year to 945 in 2017 and 2018. Severe weather events had a large impact on student homelessness in the state of Texas, with the number of students experiencing homelessness jumping from 117,000 in the 2016-17 school year to 231,000 in the following year. It's likely that some of your school districts experienced similar increases in local students being classified as homeless following 2017 disasters. The total number of identified students experiencing homelessness nationwide topped 1.5 million students for the first time in the 2017-18 school year. Another key element to consider is the influx of students, as we discussed before, from non-local communities and schools, as was the case for many states following Hurricane Maria, which provides another noteworthy example of the impacts of displaced students and families and their need to migrate to new cities and states. School enrollment data collected between December 2016 and February 2017 shows that just 5 months after the Hurricane Maria catastrophe, many Puerto Rican families migrated to eastern states, including Florida, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Illinois. The numbers on the screen show how many students enrolled per state. And this just gives you a sense of how disasters in other localities or states can impact the emergency planning efforts in other states, particularly as it relates to providing supports for students experiencing homelessness. And lastly, as the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted education, children and youth experiencing homelessness became exceptionally vulnerable. Identifying those students was somewhat of a challenge during the pandemic, particularly considering how many schools and school districts moved into virtual or remote learning. The Hettinger report that we discovered stated that despite reports of increasing homelessness throughout the country, nationally, an estimated 420,000 students experiencing homelessness went missing from schools during the pandemic. Large-scale disasters often result in significant changes in the number of children and youth, as we realized before with Hurricane Harvey and Maria, who are identified by school systems as experiencing homelessness. There was a 14% decrease in the number of identified homeless students between 2019 and 20 and the 2020-21 school year. So that just gives you a sense of the impact of the pandemic. And I'm going to turn things over to Kenya now to talk about additional practices to consider.
Thank you. School systems are often looking for innovative ways to respond to threats. Here, we would like to share some practices from recent events that may inform your own local EOP. When school buildings have been closed, staff have found innovative ways to deploy existing school resources. School buses have been used as mobile internet hubs or to deliver free meals in under-resourced communities. When schools are closed due to weather or buildings are unsafe, hybrid learning environments and online classrooms have become more common. LEAs, or school districts, sometimes in partnership with local utilities, have provided free laptops to students and families experiencing homelessness.
And as we shared via the COVID-19 snapshot, some emergencies can make it difficult to account for all students. So have a plan in place with your McKinney-Vento liaisons to help locate and remain in touch with students and families experiencing homelessness. This may include coordinating with area liaisons to get resources to those students who are living in their attendance areas, again, purchasing prepaid cell phones, and coordinating outreach to families, students at campgrounds, motels, laundromat, convenience stores, shelters, etc. Supporting continuity of learning is an important part of the recovery process, and in some cases, this may mean that schools have to revert to hybrid or remote learning. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some education agencies partnered with their school transportation providers to offer mobile learning centers for students who lacked internet access or at homes who weren't able to work from a designated home setting. Transportation providers are also great partners in the event students and families experiencing homelessness need support with being transported from family reunification sites, or if support is needed with delivering required supplies and learning materials to students and families to support continuity of education and learning. Lastly, the trauma associated with experiencing an emergency can be difficult for students and their families. When you couple that with displacement and homelessness, it can add another layer of stress and trauma. Work with your community partners to train staff on providing psychological first aid, and also consider offering workshops or trainings for staff who need resilience strategies to help cope with their own compassion fatigue.
Thank you, Janelle. Now, we will highlight a few resources from NCHE and the REMS TA Center that may be used by local homeless education liaisons, as well as school safety leaders, planning team members, community partners, and other individuals who have an interest or role in school emergency management planning. We would like to share some NCHE resources with you that may help in supporting children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. NCHE has a dedicated resource page for disaster preparation and response. It includes a series of issue briefs and handbooks targeted at different school roles and partners. NCHE also has a dedicated resource page for unaccompanied homeless youth, which includes materials specific to emergency situations. This brings us back to one of the first slides we shared with you today. We would like to invite you to spend some time on the NCHE website at nche.ed.gov, where you may click on the topics bar at the top of your screen and search alphabetically for more information and resources. For example, if you would like to learn more about McKinney-Vento eligibility, click on the eligibility resource page for NCHE and other resources.
And the REMS TA Center also offers a few resources on this topic, including a REMS on the Air podcast episode on providing supports for students and families experiencing homelessness, which you can access via our website at https://rems.ed.gov/podcast. And we also hosted an archived webinar on this topic that looks at it specifically from the perspective of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we welcome you to view as well. Lastly, we want to turn your attention to a few federal resources that you can see on the screen specific to those supports that are available for students and families experiencing homelessness, including a webpage from the U.S. Department of Education on identifying and supporting students experiencing homelessness from preschool to the post-secondary ages. Also, a disaster response for homeless individuals and families resource, and really looking at it from a trauma-informed approach. This resource is developed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and their Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response.
That is all for today's training. If you are viewing this pre-recorded webinar from the NCHE website, you will now be transferred to a web page where you can complete a knowledge check to test your learning. Upon satisfactory completion, you'll be given an opportunity to download a certificate of proficiency, which you may wish to keep for your records. Thank you for joining us, and we urge you to call on us at NCHE or the REMS TA Center if we can be of any assistance.